Our next speaker is a former colleague of mine at the State Department, where he served as Undersecretary of State before serving the United States as permanent representative to the United Nations. Please welcome Ambassador John Bolton.
Thank you very much. Thank you to the organizers, Madam Rajavi and others, for inviting us here today to this very important discussion. I think 2012 is going to be a dispositive year for Iran, for Iraq, for the broader region, and perhaps the world because of developments taking place there. And I think that in many respects what happens to Camp Ashraf and the MEK are, as we say, canaries in the coal mine. We're going to learn a lot by how these issues are resolved. Let me start first with Camp Ashraf and the disposition of the people there. You know, the United Nations is a culture of its own. I know how it operates. I understand why there are difficulties with dealing with the UN assistance mission in Iraq, in part because it sees itself as accredited to the government of Iraq. Part of its objective is to make sure it gets along with the government of Iraq. So I think it's very important, as Madam Rajavi and others negotiate with Ambassador Kubler, that those who want an equitable and correct result for Camp Ashraf understand what needs to be done to persuade the ambassador and the UN bureaucracy in New York that their principal responsibility is not making the government of Iraq happy. It's protecting the residents of Camp Ashraf. Now, number two, UNAMI is not the only element of the United Nations involved here. The UN High Commissioner for Refugees has global responsibility for refugees. You know, the symbol of UNHCR is a picture of a refugee family with two human hands forming a roof over it, depicting HCR's mission of protection and assistance. The UNHCR doesn't operate under any illusions that it's responsible to member governments where refugee populations live. I think that the High Commissioner for Refugees really needs to take a look at the symbol on the flag in his office and remember that protection and assistance for the refugees comes before anything else. And I think members of the UN that care about that should be insisting on it. I'd say a nice symbolic thing for the High Commissioner to do would be to take his flag and get on a plane from Geneva and go to Baghdad and drive to Ashraf and plant that flag in Camp Ashraf. You know, most refugees come across international borders with little more than the clothes on their backs, and it's the responsibility of HCR to provide them with protection and to provide them with a place where they can take refuge until they're either moved to other countries or they can go back to their own country without fear of persecution. Camp Ashraf is not a problem. Camp Ashraf is an interim solution. And how tragic it would be, how tragic it would be, what a stain on the reputation of this Nobel Peace Prize winning agency to preside over a degradation in the living status and freedom and welfare of refugees. I just really don't think if the West and others put appropriate pressure on UNHCR that Commissioner Gutierrez really wants that to happen. And I think it's important that he understand that. Now, let me turn to the question of Iraq. You know, there are those in the world who believe that the reduction of U.S. military capabilities and the withdrawal of American forces will contribute to international peace and security. I believe they are 100% wrong in that view. And there has not been, I think, a more tragic demonstration of the error of that way of thinking than to see what's happened in Iraq since the withdrawal of American forces. I have been amazed at the speed with which Nouri al-Maliki's government has disregarded even the pretense of a free and open political system and the rule of law. We don't exercise our influence, as other speakers have said, to make sure that the government of Iraq honors the commitment that the United States made to them. What conclusion will the regime in Tehran draw from that? What conclusion will they draw about American will and resolve, especially when we look at the performance of this dictatorship in Tehran just in recent weeks, threatening to close the Strait of Hormuz, through which so much vital oil is shipped into the international market, being indicted in the United States for conspiring to assassinate the Saudi Arabian ambassador on the streets of Washington, contributing to the killing of thousands of civilians in Syria, supporting that fascist dictatorship in Damascus, continuing to support international terrorists like Hezbollah and Hamas, and obviously, and worst of all, continuing to make progress toward its long-sought objective of nuclear weapons. You know, there's a lot of talk in the press these days about sanctions which the United States is going to impose and sanctions which the European Union is considering. I wouldn't draw too much comfort from that talk about the sanctions, because Iran is, by the estimate of Secretary of Defense Panetta, within 1 year of achieving that objective of getting nuclear weapons. U.S. sanctions on the central bank of Iran will not take effect for 6 months. They are subject to waiver provisions, and the President of the United States himself said when he signed the legislation authoring those sanctions into law that he didn't believe he was constitutionally bound by them. So one can ask, in the race between Iran's effort to get nuclear weapons and our efforts to sanction him, who's going to win that race? It is a very, very dangerous situation we're in. And if there is any signal that the United States and Europe send to Iran that our will is failing on such a matter as humanitarian protection for innocent women, children, and male civilians, I don't know what signal it will send on the nuclear weapons program. And that comes... That brings us to the most important thing that the United States can do. You know, I've listened to some of my colleagues express their concern that maybe the State Department isn't quite up to the job of protecting the people at Ashraf. And the reason, I think, beyond anything else, why the State Department has not been strong in carrying out its responsibilities to honor America's own word is because the State Department has not yet announced its decision on whether or not to delist the MEK as a foreign terrorist organization. You've heard the other speakers say they know of no evidence why that listing should continue. I think that the issue here is really quite simple. I don't think that organizations should be put on that list for political purposes, as the MEK was in 1997. I don't think organizations should be kept on that list, as the MEK was in 2008, for political purposes. I think the facts should be allowed to fall where they may. If the State Department has facts that justify the listing, let's hear them. If it doesn't have any facts, delist the MEK and remove this pretense that Iran and the al-Maliki government use to try to pressure the residents of Camp Ashraf. And I'll just close with one final thought. I have a very simple view of America's role in the world. It is to lead in the defense of liberty. And in that connection, I think it should be, and long since, it should be the declared policy of the United States to overthrow the regime in Tehran. Thank you very much.